Hey guys, it's Archon. Welcome to Inferno Friday. This week I wanted to talk to you guys about a brand new forum post from MrMonstrosity. If you guys haven't heard of MrMonstrosity, he makes some really awesome forum posts about what he'd like to see added to Diablo. They're really good. He has some great ideas that are really well thought out. He really understands the game, and he puts a ton of work into these forum posts. He does Photoshop, really shows off the new features he's talking about, and they're really fun to read. He's done a couple, at least a handful so far. This one's about Nephalem Trials. I'm going to go over it, give you guys my opinion, what I like and what I disagree with about the post. But before I get into that, I want to tell you about a little event I'm going to be having next week with MrMonstrosity and some other cool people like Travis Day from Blizzard. As I'm sure many of you guys know, this design a legendary process has been going on for a while with the community. Blizzard has decided to let the community help them design a brand new legendary for Reaper of Souls. So the community voted that it would be a one-handed sword, and then just recently that it would be based off of Mephisto. And for the next step of the legendary design process, we're going to be having a podcast. It's going to be next Wednesday, December the 11th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be me, Twiz from Twizcast, Flux from Diablo Inc. Gamers, MrMonstrosity, Travis Day, and John Yang. Travis Day and John Yang are both game designers for Diablo, and we're just going to brainstorm ideas for what the legendary could have. My guess is we'll come up with a good list and then you guys will vote again, but I'm not sure. It should be really awesome. I think it's going to be about an hour and a half. We're just going to be talking with the developers, and it's going to be really cool to be able to have MrMonstrosity and Twiz and Flux there as well, and just brainstorm and come up with some really cool ideas. And it's all going to be live streamed, so you guys can be there, and then there'll be a recording. Again, that's next Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. But enough of me promoting myself. Let me get on with this forum post. So MrMonstrosity is talking about Nephalem Trials in this forum post. Nephalem Trials were announced a few months ago, but then shortly after that they said they're not going to make it into Reaper of Souls, which is kind of disappointing. They haven't said too much about Nephalem Trials other than that they're going to be challenges in the game that you can test yourself to see how many demons you can kill or how long you can survive. There was some information in the data mine information about the different kinds of trials they're trying out, and they sound really cool. But MrMonstrosity had some ideas of his own, and he put some of his opinions in here as well. He starts off by saying we need some kind of competition in Diablo. We need a way to compare ourselves to other players that isn't just time-based. Something more than Diablo progress where you go on and see who has the best gear, who has the most DPS. He says that's mostly time-based, although in vanilla Diablo that's mostly auction house based. But in Reaper of Souls it would be time based, and a traditional ladder would be the same way. He wants something that's more skill based. Now I was glad that he said it can't be entirely skill based, it has to be partly gear based, because I know a lot of players out there want something that's 100% skill based. It doesn't matter how much time you've put into it, it doesn't matter how good your gear is, everyone should be on an even playing field. And I think there's two problems with that. One, it's just really hard to do. It's really hard to give someone just a standard set of gear without letting them choose stats that's going to be good for their build, and then ultimately certain builds are going to end up being better with that standardized gear. The other reason is that Diablo is an item-based game. The biggest reason Diablo is so fun is because it's really fun to find items and watch your character progress. Any focus you put on skill means taking focus away from gear. And if a big part of the game is only skill-based, and the gear you're finding, the time you're putting into the game, doesn't matter in this very big part of the game, then it makes it a little bit less fun to find items. So I think putting a little bit more emphasis on skill could be cool for Diablo, but too much takes away that joy of the item hunt. And really you want to be able to use your character. Even if you're doing challenges, you want it to be your character, and if you don't get to use your gear, it's not really your character. It's just a generic character that was made by the game. So MrMonstrosity agrees it should be somewhat gear-based, but he'd also like to see some skill in there. And he goes on to speculate a little bit that maybe the reason we're not getting Nephalem Trials and they haven't announced Ladder is that they're going to introduce them together. He thinks maybe Ladder and Nephalem Trials will be tied together and there'll be some kind of ranking system in Nephalem Trials. I, however, think that's probably just wishful thinking. MrMonstrosity makes a good point for it, and he argues why he likes that system. I don't think that's going to be the case. I personally think we're still going to get ladders on the release of Reaper of Souls. I think they haven't decided for sure yet, and they don't want to announce it unless they know it's going to be in there, because a lot of players would be upset if they announced it and then it wasn't in there. And Nephalem Trials, it looks like they want to get in there, they just don't have time to put it in there. But who knows? It could be a system like he describes here, and I'll go through his explanation of it. You can also read this forum post that's linked below in the description. His first idea is nothing new. A lot of players have suggested this for over a year now, I think, but it's the endless horde. Just endless waves of enemies coming at you. People have also described it as an endless dungeon. We're just going through endless waves of enemies, and the waves get harder and harder and harder. I think there are some problems with this idea, but I think the majority of us really like this idea of just testing ourselves from an endless wave of enemies. Now, I do like the waves more than the dungeon, and I'll tell you why. The problem with an endless dungeon that constantly gets harder and harder and harder is they only have a few ways to make enemies harder. Enemies deal more damage, and enemies have more health. And what we've seen is when you crank up enemies' damage and health too much, the game stops being fun. If you guys think back to original Inferno, people just have to use really weird strategies of either being super tanky so they can take the hits, but they're doing such little damage that it takes forever to kill anything, or they go super glass cannon, so they can actually kill stuff, but if they ever get hit once, they're dead. And those are the only two strategies that really make sense once you get to a certain difficulty level, and it's not really fun to play that way. But if you have it in a wave system, and especially the way that MrMonstrosity has it here, where waves come every certain interval, whether you're ready for them or not, you can't play super defensive, you can't run away and just try to kill one monster at a time, you have to kill them quickly. So if you get to a certain difficulty that you can't handle, you're just going to lose very quickly. Now, there are other ways to make monsters more challenging. You could add more affixes, which in my opinion would just get frustrating. If you have 10 affixes on one monster, it's not going to be very fun to play anymore. There's going to be nowhere you can stand and nothing you can do about it. And you could make new monsters that are just a little bit more challenging to fight, but of course that's a ton of development time that they probably just don't have with all the other features they're trying to add. And so it seems like it would have to be just cranking up the health and damage the same way it is on difficulty. And I think it could be fun, but I think you're going to hit a wall pretty quick, and that wall is going to be based mostly on your gear. But as MrMonstrosity points out, there would be some skill involved, and it would be kind of fun to test not only your gear, but your skill against other players and see how well you rank. His second idea is a time dungeon. I think this one's a really solid idea. He compares it to the challenge modes in World of Warcraft, where you would just have a set dungeon with a set difficulty, and you'd have to go through and clear all the monsters as fast as possible, and you'd be ranked based on how quickly you clear the dungeon. I think that could be really cool. Again, it's mostly gear-based. I would say vast majority of it would be gear-based, but still a lot of skill in there as well. It would make a difference, but I would say it's a more fun way to compare your characters with other people and compare your playstyle as well than just traditional ladder. So I think it's a good idea. His last idea, however, Goblin Hunt. This sounds really fun at first. The idea is that you would go into a dungeon and there's just goblins everywhere, treasure goblins, and you're trying to kill as many of them as you can. And maybe certain treasure goblins, certain types of treasure goblins would give you a better reward than other types. And that sounds really fun, but I think if you think about it enough, you'll realize the reason killing treasure goblins is so fun is it's the treasure part. That's the treasure is what you really want from the treasure goblins. And in all of these challenge modes, you can't really let players keep the experience and gear they're getting. Otherwise, they'd likely become the best place to farm, and then that's all players would do. You would never do bounties or adventure mode. You would just do challenges all the time. So you have to do these as just ways to measure your character, which means you can't keep the loot you're getting from treasure goblins. And when you remove the loot you get from treasure goblins, they're not that fun to kill. They just sit there and then they run away from you forever. If you just made another mob that acted like treasure goblins did and didn't drop treasure, you would never fight it. You would just be like, oh, those annoying guys. I'm just going to let them run away. So I think it's a cool idea. I think it works really well in the Nephalem Rifts when you occasionally get a bunch of treasure goblins because you actually get to keep the treasure. I don't know so much about it as a Nephalem trial. But the other two ideas I thought were really solid. He goes into ranking and ladders after that, and he's saying his idea is that the ladder system wouldn't at all be like a traditional ladder system. It wouldn't be based on your gear and your progress. It would only be based on your scores in these trials. The three examples he gives are the ones he uses for the score. And you can see here MrMonstrosity makes some awesome little screens here with Photoshop. I imagine this is what he's using, but it looks really good. Like, it really looks like it's in the game. And this is one of the things that makes his post so awesome. But he shows each person would have their individual ranking, how many waves they did on Endless Horde, and then a score based on on their time or how many waves or how many kills they got, and then it would rank you in the world based on your class and how many people were in your group. So he said it would be impossible to balance between the classes, so you'd want an individual rank for each class, which I think is probably the best idea, and then you'd also have individual rank for each amount of players, so 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, if you weren't doing it solo, and then you could see your rank on a leaderboard. And I think that's a pretty cool idea. I think this really appeals to the hardcore Diablo 3 gamers, the really competitive players. I think a lot of players wouldn't care for this idea. They don't want to feel like pressured to rank high. They don't want to compete. They just want to have fun and enjoy the game. So I think you wouldn't want to make it too big a part of the game, but MrMonstrosity addresses that too. Later in the post I'll show, he says that the rewards would only be cosmetic, which I like. I don't think that you should be required to do this to gear up. And he talks about seasons. Here I disagreed with him a little bit as well. He said the ladder seasons wouldn't reset the game. He said the thing he hated the most about the Diablo 2 ladder was the reset, that he lost his character, had to go back to non-ladder, and he had to start all over again from scratch, and that was really frustrating. I think there's probably a lot of players that feel this way, most likely the more casual players who didn't get some of the best legendaries and just wanted to keep working on their character. Personally, I think that non-ladder is perfect for casual players, and the ladder is good for players who are playing hours a day, 20 plus hours a week, and are going to get good gear very quickly. The way Reaper of Souls is set up right now on the beta is legendaries drop a lot. We know that's going to be toned down a bit, but I still think you want to have the legendary drop rate high enough that you feel like you might get a legendary at any second. And when you have that legendary drop rate that high, it's not going to be too long before you get all the legendaries you need for your ideal build. And at that point, you're just looking for legendaries with a little bit higher stats or some more mats so you can re-roll one of those stats one more time and try to get a little bit higher number. And at that point, the game just becomes less fun. It's not as enjoyable to gear up when you can't get big improvements to your gear. The other way to do it would be to severely lower the legendary rate, so it takes a while, but then the game's just not as much fun. It would feel more like vanilla Diablo, where you never know when you're going to get a legendary. So I like the reset. I think for the hardcore players, it works out really well. You can start over, try a new class this time, try a new build this time, and you're constantly getting those awesome legendaries. Makes the gameplay a lot more fun. But to each his own. I would say, if you're casual, stick to non-ladder, but we'll see. Then he goes to the rewards here. He says you would get rewards based on your rank, and they would be purely cosmetic, which I agree with. Like I said before, I don't think it should be a good way to gear up. I think this should just be a way to test your characters. We already have several endgame types to gear up, which I think is cool. He says that you would get cosmetic rewards based on your rank. I think it would be good if some of the cosmetic rewards were just based on your score. It doesn't matter what other players get. It doesn't matter if you're in the top 100. If you get this score, you get this one. And then there could be some more prestigious rewards that you get just for your rank. And the reason I say that has a lot to do with the original WoW Battlegrounds. In Battlegrounds, the honor system in World of Warcraft, when it first came out, you got gear just based on your rank. But what happened is a lot of people worked really hard in PvP and just never had the skill to compete against other people, and they just got nothing because they couldn't compete with the top ranked people. So I think it's better if just achieving a certain score gets you the reward, and then of course the best stuff would be based on your rank. Overall, MrMonstrosity's post was really good as always. I thought it was really cool. I hope that we see something like this with Nephalem Trials. We've seen a few of the Nephalem Trials as events in Reaper of Souls, although we're not sure which ones were trials, but I think they could be really good. I think Blizzard's got a good handle on it. Again, the data mine information had some really good ideas for trials, and I think it could be a lot of fun to try to test your character, even though it has to be mostly gear based. In my opinion, I don't think we can do entirely skill-based, but a good mix of the two could make for a lot of fun and a good way to compare our gear to each other. I'd love to know what you guys think, so please leave a comment below. If you want to read the post first, it's linked in the description. You can go through it. Let me know what your opinion is. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? I'll try to read all the comments. I really enjoy hearing your guys' opinion. And don't miss the Design a Legendary podcast. I believe Blizzard will be announcing it today, but it's going to be Wednesday, December 11th at 5 p.m. Pacific or 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be awesome, and I hope to see you guys there. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll have another one for you soon.